Who would have imagined that this once celebrated chef, known for losing over 250 pounds, would later be accused of murdering his son?
How was that?
That was amazing!
The same boy seen beside him in that video, along with his wife and their other child. On December 25, 2017, at approximately 6 p.m., Scottsdale police forced entry into a home on North 60th Place after family members reported they couldn't reach Iris Ross or her two sons. Inside, officers discovered all three dead. Iris Ross was 38. Her sons, Anson and Nigel, were 8 and 5 years old. They had been murdered in their own home on Christmas morning.
You better watch out.
You better not cry.
Ross posted this heartwarming video with his 11-year-old son Nigel just 90 minutes before he allegedly shot and killed the boy, his 10-month-old daughter Honora, and his estranged wife Iris in a murderous rampage.
Before we get into the details of how investigators pieced together what happened that morning, please consider subscribing. Cases like this need to be told, and the victims deserve to be remembered. Anthony Malin Ross called himself the vegan magician. He was even featured on the news for losing half of his body weight.
Life is looking good for Malin Ross these days. At 45, he's never felt better.
I've lost more weight than I weigh now, which is crazy.
He was a self-styled celebrity chef who appeared on local Phoenix television shows and hosted pop-up dining events around Arizona. It's also important to note that this man was a vlogger, documenting nearly every part of his life for the world to see.
With her children.
Hey guys, this is Malin Ross, and I got my road buddy here with me. We are finally in LA, and we are headed to the Dr. Phil's house to film. We're gonna be filming tonight, so we will broadcast from there and say what's up to you guys. Nigel hasn't stopped talking since we got here. He is so excited. I am just looking forward to being a support system for him while he's on the show.
He had a decent social media following and positioned himself as an innovative plant-based chef. Ross also wrote a book called The Change, Transforming Yourself and Your Body into the Person You Want to Be, and appeared in at least one vegan documentary alongside notable figures. His videos often featured personal moments with his family, helping him cultivate a persona of success and inspiration. But his business ventures consistently failed. Records show that multiple restaurant concepts collapsed within months of opening. He struggled to maintain steady income, and by late 2017, the family was living almost entirely on Iris's salary. She worked full-time while Anthony bounced between failed culinary projects and increasingly erratic behavior at home. Iris had been with Anthony for years, but by 2017, the marriage was over in everything but name. They still lived in the same house, but Iris had made it clear she was leaving. She confided in friends that Anthony had become controlling and volatile. She told her sister she was afraid of what he might do if she actually filed for divorce. In the months before her death, Iris started looking at apartments and consulting with attorneys. She was planning her exit carefully because she knew Anthony wouldn't take it well. What she didn't know was that he was already planning something far worse. On Christmas Day, concern quickly grew among relatives when they could not reach Iris Ross or her children, 11-year-old Nigel and 10-month-old Honora. Calls went unanswered, and attempts to check on the family raised a sense that something was wrong. Authorities were alerted, and police arrived at Anthony Malin Ross's Phoenix apartment in the afternoon to perform a welfare check. What they found was shocking and tragic. Iris had been shot outside on the apartment patio, a violent act witnessed by neighbors. The children's bodies were later discovered inside the apartment, victims of gunfire. Ross had barricaded himself inside, creating a tense standoff with law enforcement that lasted for hours. During that time, he reportedly admitted to killing the children and even fired at officers before finally being taken into custody. Despite the gravity of the situation, he remained calm during his arrest and immediately invoked his right to remain silent when questioned.
We are learning new details about a deadly shooting that prompted an hours-long standoff last night near 16th Street in Highland. Investigators have identified both the gunman and the victims. They say Anthony Ross shot and killed his ex-wife before turning the gun on his 10-month-old and 11-year-old children. An officer was also hurt in that standoff. Ross is currently in police custody, facing multiple murder charges and several counts of aggravated assault. He's being held without bond.
The investigation confirmed that Anthony Malin Ross was solely responsible for the killings. There was no evidence of a third party entering the apartment. Investigators collected physical evidence linking Ross to the murders, including firearm evidence consistent with the shootings. Ross was the only suspect, and there was no credible indication of anyone else being involved in the tragic events. Detectives obtained warrants for Anthony's electronic devices. His phone records showed that in the 2 weeks leading up to Christmas, he had been searching online for information about life insurance payouts, forensic evidence collection, and how to disable home security systems. On December 20th, just 5 days before the murders, Anthony researched how long it takes for a body to decompose and whether cleaning products can eliminate DNA evidence. His browser history also included multiple searches related to spousal homicide cases and whether premeditation could be proven without a confession. Prosecutors would later argue this was clear evidence that Anthony had been planning the murders for weeks. Text messages between Anthony and Iris were equally damning. In early December, Iris told him she wanted a separation and that she was consulting a divorce attorney. Anthony responded with a series of messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. On December 10th, he texted her, "If you leave, you'll regret it. I promise you that." On December 15th, Iris told a friend via text that she was scared of Anthony and that she was planning to move out quietly without telling him in advance. She wrote, "I don't think he'll let me go without a fight." That message would become a key piece of evidence at trial. Financial records painted a picture of a man who was desperate. Anthony had taken out several high-interest loans in the months before the murders, all of which were in default. He owed more than $60,000 in combined credit card debt and unpaid business expenses. Iris had recently removed him as a joint account holder on her checking account after discovering he had been making unauthorized withdrawals. Prosecutors theorized that Anthony saw Iris's departure as a financial catastrophe. He would lose access to her income, the house, and custody of the children. Rather than face that reality, he decided to kill them all. Another big revelation also came forward that would further prove just how much of a coward he truly is. It turns out Ross had daughters, an entire family, that he hid from his wife and children for years.
Just a secret, a dark, dirty secret.
That family, 4 girls and a wife, abandoned in Missouri back in 2003. Court documents show their mother, Nicole Ross, filing for divorce in St. Louis 5 years later. Her earnest, diligent attempts to locate him unsuccessful. Anthony Malin Ross would go on to marry Iris Sutherland in 2009.
Between 4 and 7 years into their marriage, Iris discovered that Malin had a previous marriage and that he had abandoned.
2 women came forward as the daughters Anthony Malin Ross abandoned years before the Christmas Day murders. Long before he built a new life in Phoenix, Ross had an entire family in Missouri. 4 daughters and a wife he simply walked away from. Court records show their mother filed for divorce in 2003 after Ross disappeared. For years, her repeated attempts to locate him were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Ross moved on, later marrying Iris Sutherland in 2009, without ever revealing that he already had children. The daughters described a childhood filled with fear, neglect, and abuse. One sister recalled staying home from school until her bruises faded, while another said she and her siblings were deprived of butter and sugar for an entire year, a cruel form of punishment. Years of counseling and therapy were needed to recover from the trauma they endured. Eventually, Iris discovered the truth, that the man she married had a secret past. According to the daughters, This revelation may have influenced her decision to fight for full custody of her children. Now, these women say they are devastated by the horrific crimes Ross committed. The same man once praised online for losing over 250 pounds and promoting a healthy lifestyle is, to them, the same abuser who terrorized their childhood. Anthony was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder on December 27, 2017. Because the victims included 2 children under the age of 15, the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office announced they would seek the death penalty. Anthony pleaded not guilty. His defense attorneys argued that the state's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no murder weapon, no confession, no eyewitnesses. They claimed the forensic evidence could be explained by the fact that Anthony lived in the house and had regular contact with his family. The trial didn't begin until 2024, nearly 7 years after the murders. The delay was due to a combination of factors: Anthony's repeated requests for new counsel, court backlogs, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down jury trials for more than a year. When the trial finally started, it lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutors presented more than 80 pieces of evidence, including crime scene photos, autopsy reports, phone records, and testimony from forensic experts. Detectives testified about Anthony's behavior after his arrest. He showed no emotion when told his wife and children were dead. He didn't ask questions. He didn't cry. He simply stared at the wall and said nothing. One investigator testified that in more than 20 years of law enforcement, he had never seen a parent respond to the death of their children with such complete indifference. The prosecution also called Iris's sister to the stand. She testified that Iris had told her multiple times she was afraid of Anthony and that if anything ever happened to her, police should look at him first. She read aloud a text message Iris had sent her on December 20th. "I'm scared. I don't know what he'll do when I tell him I'm actually leaving this time." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. On March 14th, 2024, they returned a verdict: guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Anthony showed no reaction when the verdict was read. Iris's family wept quietly in the courtroom. What emerged during the trial was a pattern of behavior that went back years. Neighbors testified that they had heard arguments coming from the Ross home on multiple occasions, sometimes late at night when the children should have been sleeping. One neighbor recalled seeing Iris sitting in her car in the driveway for over an hour one evening, just staring straight ahead, as if she was afraid to go inside. Another neighbor testified that Anthony had once cornered him in the street and ranted for 20 minutes about how Iris was trying to destroy his reputation and turn people against him. The neighbor described Anthony as paranoid and increasingly unstable in the months leading up to the murders. Co-workers of Iris also took the stand. They described a woman who came to work exhausted, often with dark circles under her eyes, and who seemed perpetually on edge. One colleague testified that Iris had confided in her about Anthony's controlling behavior, including his habit of tracking her phone and demanding to know where she was at all times. Iris had told this coworker that Anthony monitored her text messages and emails, and that he had accused her of having affairs, even though there was no evidence to support his claims. The coworker said Iris had asked about resources for domestic violence victims, but was too afraid to actually reach out for help because she worried Anthony would find out and retaliate. The prosecution also presented evidence of Anthony's online activity beyond his search history. They revealed that he had been active on various online forums discussing relationship problems, often portraying himself as the victim of an unfair and vindictive wife. In one post from November 2017, just weeks before the murders, Anthony wrote that his wife was trying to take everything from him and that he felt trapped with no way out. In another post, he asked other users whether anyone had ever successfully fought back against a vengeful ex-spouse and won. These posts were presented to the jury as evidence of Anthony's growing desperation and his mindset in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Forensic psychologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell testified for the prosecution about the dynamics of domestic violence homicides. She explained that men who kill their partners and children during separation often do so because they view their family as property rather than as independent human beings. She testified that Anthony's behavior, the controlling tactics, the financial manipulation, the threats, were all classic indicators of someone who saw his family as extensions of himself. When Iris made it clear she was leaving, Dr. Mitchell explained, Anthony likely experienced what psychologists call narcissistic injury, a deep wound to his ego and sense of control. Rather than accept the loss, he chose annihilation. The doctor stated that in her professional opinion, the murders were an act of ultimate control, a way for Anthony to ensure that if he couldn't have his family, no one else would either. The defense attempted to challenge Dr. Mitchell's testimony by bringing in their own expert, who suggested that Anthony might have suffered from undiagnosed mental illness that impaired his judgment. However, this expert admitted under cross-examination that there was no documented history of mental health treatment for Anthony, and that his behavior was more consistent with antisocial personality traits than with psychosis or other serious mental disorders. The defense's case ultimately crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Jurors later told reporters that the combination of forensic evidence, Anthony's internet searches, his behavior after the murders, and testimony from people who knew the family made it impossible to conclude anyone else was responsible. Sentencing is scheduled for later this year. Anthony faces either life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. The jury will reconvene to hear additional testimony before making that recommendation. Iris's family has stated they support the death penalty, arguing that Anthony took 3 lives in the most brutal way imaginable and showed no remorse whatsoever. Anthony's defense team has indicated they will appeal the verdict, claiming the trial was tainted by media coverage and that the jury was biased against him from the start. This case is a stark reminder of how dangerous domestic violence can be, especially during separation. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the period when a victim is leaving or has just left an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time. Statistically, 75% of domestic violence homicides occur at the point of separation or after the victim has left. Iris knew she was in danger. She told people. She made plans. But she didn't leave fast enough. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, resources are available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. Anthony Malin Ross built a public persona as a creative, successful chef and father. But behind that image was a man consumed by control and rage. Iris, Anson, and Nigel deserved more. They deserved safety. They deserved a future. Instead, they were killed by the one person who should have protected them.
Tonight, an axe-wielding husband is being held without bail after state troopers say he admitted to killing his wife.
Try to imagine the heartbreak of 2 young children learning this devastating truth during what should have been a joyful Christmas weekend. The details you're about to hear only make the story even more chilling. It all began on Christmas Eve, 2014, when Dustin Lee Klopp became involved in an argument with his wife, Stephanie Kilhefner. What started behind closed doors quickly turned violent. In a horrifying act, Dustin killed Stephanie, slashing her throat and striking her with an axe. The following day, he carried on as if nothing had happened, taking their young children to celebrate Christmas, while secretly hiding Stephanie's body in a shed on their property. But the nightmare couldn't remain hidden. That evening, Dustin called the police and confessed, revealing a crime that would send chills through the entire community.
Police say Klopp then punched his wife, slit her throat, and then hit her in the head with an axe.
So what drove Dustin to do this? Was it simply an uncontrollable act of rage, Or was something darker at play? Before we answer that, let's take a closer look at the family so we can better understand the events that led up to this tragic moment. Paradise Township in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, carries the kind of name that promises safety and tranquility, and for the most part, it delivers on that promise. This rural community sits nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania Dutch country, where horse-drawn buggies still share the roads with cars, and where neighbors actually know each other by name rather than just by the cars they drive. The crime rate here typically consists of minor property disputes and the occasional teenage vandalism, nothing that would prepare residents for what unfolded on Georgetown Road during the 2014 holiday season. At 623 Georgetown Road stood a modest home that housed what appeared to be a typical young American family. 34-year-old Stephanie Kilhefner had made this house into a warm sanctuary for her husband Dustin and their 2 children, a 5-year-old and a toddler who had recently celebrated their 2nd birthday. The property included several outbuildings common to rural Pennsylvania homes, including a shed that would later become central to this tragic story. Stephanie herself embodied the kind of person who seemed to bring light into every space she entered. Friends and family members would later describe her profound connection with horses, explaining how her entire demeanor would transform when she spoke about them or worked with them. Her social media presence painted a picture of domestic contentment that would later take on a haunting quality. Just 2 weeks before Christmas Eve 2014, Stephanie had updated her Facebook profile picture to show what she considered her whole world. Dustin peacefully napping on the couch with their 2 children and the family dog, a moment of such ordinary tenderness that she felt compelled to preserve and share it. The image suggested a family at peace with itself, comfortable in the rhythms of daily life, preparing for what should have been another joyful holiday season together. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a more complex and troubling reality that Stephanie may have been trying to navigate alone. Dustin Lee Klopp brought into their marriage a criminal history that stretched back years before they met, a pattern of behavior that suggested difficulties with impulse control and respect for the law. Court records would reveal a timeline of escalating encounters with law enforcement that began in 1997 when Dustin pleaded guilty to charges of burglary and simple assault. This was followed by another burglary conviction in 2001, this time coupled with resisting arrest, suggesting an increasing willingness to challenge authority even when caught in wrongdoing. The pattern continued through the 2000s with 2 DUI convictions in 2007, indicating problems with alcohol that had reached the point of endangering others on the road. Another resisting arrest charge in 2009 reinforced the image of someone who struggled to accept consequences for his actions. Most significantly, Dustin had served a 2 to 4 year prison sentence for drug-related charges emerging from incarceration in 2011, the very same year he married Stephanie. Attorney Corey Miller, who had represented Dustin in previous legal matters, would later express genuine surprise at the murder charges, describing his former client as level-headed and not someone he would have considered capable of violence. Miller emphasized that throughout his dealings with Dustin, there had been no documented incidents of domestic violence between the couple, no police reports of arguments that had gotten out of hand, no restraining orders or protective orders that might have signaled danger ahead. This absence of obvious warning signs would become one of the most troubling aspects of the case, raising uncomfortable questions about how well we can ever truly know the people closest to us, and whether some forms of domestic tension remain invisible until they explode into irreversible tragedy. According to the timeline constructed by Pennsylvania State Police investigators, the argument began around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on December 24, 2014. The house on Georgetown Road, which should have been filled with the excitement of Christmas Eve preparations and the anticipation of Santa's arrival for 2 young children, instead became the scene of an escalating domestic dispute whose initial cause would never be definitively determined. District Attorney Craig Stedman would later emphasize in public statements that investigators never uncovered the specific trigger for the argument, though he stressed that ultimately it didn't matter because no verbal disagreement could ever justify the physical violence that followed. What emerged from Dustin's own confession and the forensic evidence collected at the scene painted a picture of rapid escalation from verbal conflict to fatal violence. During the confrontation, according to court documents and police reports, Dustin struck Stephanie with enough force to knock her to the ground. But rather than stopping there, rather than experiencing the shock and remorse that might have prevented further violence, Dustin continued his attack using multiple weapons. The medical examiner's report would confirm that Stephanie suffered fatal injuries from both a knife and an axe, weapons that required deliberate retrieval and use rather than being grabbed in a moment of rage. The presence of their 2 young children somewhere in that same house during this violence adds another layer of horror to an already incomprehensible crime. While District Attorney Stedman would later confirm that the children did not witness the actual attack, they were present in the home where their mother's life ended on what should have been one of the most magical days of the childhood calendar. However, what Dustin did in the immediate aftermath of killing his wife reveals a capacity for deception that would deeply disturb investigators and psychologists attempting to understand the case. Rather than calling 911, rather than attempting to get help or turning himself into authorities, Dustin made a series of calculated decisions designed to conceal his crime and maintain an appearance of normalcy. First, he wrapped Stephanie's body in what police reports described as a car carrier bag, the kind of mundane household item repurposed for the grimmest possible use. He then transported her body to a shed on their property, hiding it among the ordinary tools and equipment stored there. This wasn't a panicked, haphazard attempt at concealment, but rather a deliberate process that required physical effort and emotional detachment from the reality of what he had done. Returning to the house, Dustin then attempted to clean the crime scene, trying to remove bloodstains and other evidence of the violence that had occurred. The hours he spent on this cleanup represented time when he could have sought help, could have called authorities, could have faced the consequences of his actions. Instead, he focused on erasure, on making it appear as though nothing unusual had happened in the house where his children would soon wake up on Christmas morning. The most chilling aspect of Dustin's behavior emerged the following day. On Christmas morning, he woke his 5-year-old and 2-year-old children, helped them into their holiday clothing, and loaded them into the car for the drive to his parents' house. Throughout the entire Christmas celebration, he maintained his role as father and son, participating in gift exchanges, sharing Christmas dinner, posing for family photographs. Family members present at the gathering would later report noticing nothing unusual about his demeanor, no signs of distress or guilt that might have suggested the terrible secret he was harboring. But something shifted in Dustin's psychological state during that Christmas afternoon. Though what exactly triggered his decision to confess remains a subject of speculation. Perhaps the cognitive dissonance of celebrating while knowing Stephanie's body lay in the shed became unbearable. Perhaps watching his children play with their Christmas gifts while knowing they would never see their mother again finally broke through whatever psychological barriers had allowed him to maintain his facade. Or perhaps, as District Attorney Stedman suggested to reporters, Dustin developed a conscience after the fact, though this explanation seems insufficient given the calculated nature of his initial cover-up. At 5:20 in the evening on December 25th, approximately 28 hours after the murder, Dustin placed a call to Pennsylvania State Police. The confession he offered was notable for its lack of excuse or justification. He didn't claim self-defense, didn't attempt to minimize his actions, didn't blame Stephanie or suggest she had provoked him beyond reason. He simply admitted to killing his wife and provided the specific location where investigators would find her body. This straightforward admission puzzled investigators accustomed to suspects who attempt to explain away or justify their actions even while confessing. District Attorney Stedman would later tell media that in his experience, Most homicide confessions came wrapped in explanations, however flimsy or self-serving. Dustin's stark admission of guilt without accompanying rationalization suggested either complete emotional shutdown or a recognition that no explanation could possibly suffice for what he had done. After making his confession call, Dustin didn't drive himself to the police station. Instead, his father drove him to the Lancaster County State Police Headquarters, where he arrived at approximately 6:30 in the evening. This detail raised additional questions that would never be fully answered. Had Dustin confessed to his parents before calling police? Had they convinced him to turn himself in? What conversations occurred during that drive to the police station? The father's involvement suggested that Dustin had reached out to his family for support even while taking responsibility for his actions.
36-year-old Dustin Klopp remains here at Lancaster County Prison, but now prosecutors have added sexual assault charges against him.
As investigators processed the crime scene and began building their case against Dustin, disturbing additional evidence emerged that would shock even seasoned law enforcement professionals. The autopsy conducted on Stephanie's body revealed injuries consistent with assault, leading prosecutors to add charges of involuntary deviate sexual intercourse to the existing homicide charges. District Attorney Stedman, while confirming these additional charges, declined to specify whether the assault occurred before or after Stephanie's death, a detail that, while legally significant for charging purposes, added another dimension of horror to an already devastating crime.
The additional charge was one count of involuntary deviate sexual intercourse, and that was filed based on findings during the autopsy report of the victim.
The systematic nature of the violence, the use of multiple weapons, and the post-attack actions all pointed to someone capable of extreme compartmentalization and emotional detachment. Yet those who knew Dustin struggled to reconcile this capacity for violence with the man they thought they knew. His attorney, Corey Miller, continued to express disbelief, noting that in all his professional dealings with Dustin, he had never seen signs of the violence that erupted on Christmas Eve. Neighbors along Georgetown Road expressed similar shock. One resident who had exchanged holiday greetings with Stephanie just days before her death told reporters about the impossibility of believing such violence could occur in their quiet community. The woman recalled Stephanie wishing her a Merry Christmas with genuine warmth, making the subsequent tragedy even more difficult to process. As news of the murder spread through Lancaster County and beyond, investigators began examining every aspect of the Klopp family's life, searching for warning signs that might have been missed or ignored. They pored over financial records, interviewed friends and extended family members, analyzed social media posts, and attempted to construct a complete picture of the marriage that had ended so violently. What emerged was paradoxical. The couple's social media presence, particularly Stephanie's Facebook page, showed what appeared to be genuine moments of family happiness. Photos from family outings, birthday celebrations, and ordinary daily life suggested a couple engaged in the normal rhythms of raising young children. There were no cryptic posts suggesting marital discord, no calls for help disguised as status updates, none of the digital breadcrumbs that sometimes precede domestic violence incidents in the social media age. Yet the absence of obvious warning signs itself became troubling. Domestic violence experts consulted about the case noted that many abusive relationships exist behind carefully maintained public facades, with victims either unable or unwilling to seek help for complex psychological, financial, or familial reasons. The fact that no prior domestic violence incidents had been reported didn't necessarily mean they hadn't occurred, only that they hadn't reached the level of police involvement. The timing of the violence also raised questions among investigators and psychologists. Christmas Eve represents a time of heightened stress for many families, with financial pressures, family obligations, and the weight of creating perfect holiday memories combining to create a potentially explosive emotional environment. Statistics from domestic violence organizations consistently show spikes in violence during holiday periods when families spend extended time together and when the gap between expectation and reality can become particularly acute. While awaiting trial in Lancaster County Prison, Dustin's story took its final tragic turn. On February 27, 2015, just 2 months after his arrest, corrections officers discovered him in his cell, having attempted to take his own life using a bedsheet. Despite immediate medical intervention and transport to Lancaster General Hospital, the lack of oxygen during the attempt caused severe and irreversible brain damage. After 2 days on life support, Dustin was declared brain dead and subsequently pronounced deceased. The Lancaster County coroner ruled the death a self-harm and determined that no autopsy would be necessary.
Dustin Klopp had been in prison since turning himself in to police Christmas Day for the brutal murder of his wife Stephanie Kilhefner at their home in Ronks. Now, the Lancaster County Prison is where he ended his own life. The Lancaster County coroner says the 36-year-old hung himself Wednesday with a bedsheet and is now brain dead.
With Dustin's death, any possibility of understanding the full truth of what happened on Christmas Eve 2014 died with him. The questions that had plagued investigators and family members alike would remain forever unanswered. In the aftermath of this tragedy, the focus necessarily shifted to the 2 young victims who survived, the couple's children, aged 5 and 2 at the time of their mother's murder. These children, in the span of just 2 months, had lost both parents and had their entire world fundamentally altered in ways they were too young to fully comprehend. Custody was immediately granted to Stephanie's parents, their maternal grandparents, who faced the impossible task of explaining to 2 young children why Mommy and Daddy would never come home again. A memorial fund established through GoFundMe helped cover funeral expenses and provided some financial support for the children's immediate needs. Stephanie's memorial service, held on January 3, 2015, at Parksburg United Methodist Church in Philadelphia, brought together a community in mourning, struggling to make sense of a senseless loss. The service celebrated Stephanie's love for horses, her devotion to her children, and the light she had brought into the lives of those who knew her. Today, those children would be approximately 15 and 12 years old, teenagers attempting to navigate the already challenging adolescent years while carrying the weight of a tragedy that occurred before they could fully form memories of their mother. Every Christmas presumably brings complicated emotions, forever linked to the loss of their mother and the subsequent loss of their father. Every school project about family trees, every Mother's Day and Father's Day, every milestone that typically involves parental presence serves as a reminder of what violence stole from them. The case of Dustin Klopp and Stephanie Kilhefner forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence and its often hidden nature. Here was a couple that gave no obvious public signs of distress, maintained what appeared to be a normal family life on social media, and had no documented history of domestic violence calls to police. Yet in a matter of minutes on Christmas Eve, accumulated tensions or sudden rage led to irreversible tragedy. For those who work in domestic violence prevention and intervention, cases like this underscore the importance of looking beyond obvious signs of abuse. The absence of police reports doesn't mean absence of danger. The presence of seemingly happy family photos doesn't guarantee domestic harmony. And the capacity for violence can exist even in those who appear level-headed and normal to casual observers or even legal representatives. The case also highlights the particular vulnerabilities of holiday periods, when financial stress, family pressures, alcohol consumption, and enforced togetherness can create dangerous conditions in already unstable relationships. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reports consistent spikes in calls following major holidays, suggesting that the Klopp case, while extreme in its outcome, reflects broader patterns of holiday-related domestic tension. Perhaps most importantly, this case reminds us that domestic violence leaves ripples that extend far beyond the immediate victims. 2 children lost both parents, grandparents lost a daughter, and inherited the responsibility of raising traumatized grandchildren. a community lost its sense of safety, and countless others were left wondering if they could have done something, noticed something, said something that might have changed the outcome. For Stephanie Kilhefner, remembered for her love of horses and her devotion to her children, justice came in the form of her killer's confession and arrest, though his subsequent self-harm prevented the full legal process from reaching completion. For her children, justice is perhaps better measured in the love and support they receive from their grandparents and community as they attempt to build lives beyond tragedy. If this case teaches us anything, it might be that we need to remain vigilant about the signs of domestic violence, even when those signs aren't obvious. It reminds us that checking in on friends and family, creating safe spaces for disclosure, and taking concerns seriously could make the difference between intervention and tragedy. And it underscores the critical importance of resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline, available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233 for those who need help or guidance.